Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Exploring Energy presentation series presented by the Montana Renewable Energy Association. My name is Andrew Valinas, and I'm the Executive Director of MREA. All attendees have been muted, and attendees can submit questions for our presenters directly using the chat function throughout the presentation. I am going to facilitate a Q&A after our speakers are done, but please feel free to submit your questions at any time. This presentation for today is about 30 minutes long, but our speakers have graciously agreed to stay on for a few extra minutes if we have some questions that go long. So we'll try to get to all of the questions. For some reason, we do have to cut off the presentation. Please feel free to just submit your questions to MREA, and we'll go ahead and make sure that they get answered. Please know that these presentations are being recorded. We do plan to post these to our YouTube channel for those who weren't able to join us to be able to watch. I will ask that if you are not presenting to please turn off your video and make sure that you're muted, just so that we can keep the focus on our presenters, because Zoom, as we know, can sometimes just have some hiccups. Really quickly about the Montana Renewable Energy Association, for those who are not familiar, MREA, our mission is to foster the growth of renewable energy for all Montanans through education, advocacy, and industry engagement. We are a staff of 2 at the moment based in Missoula, Montana, and we work statewide on all things renewable energy. And we're really grateful for you to be joining us today. We're also really grateful in particular because this is the first of this series. We're really excited to launch this year. We've done educational presentations before, but this is kind of a new format for us based on the summer series that we did last year, if folks were able to join us for that. But we're excited about it. We're going to have one every month on the first Wednesday at noon. So thank you for joining us. And today's topic, which I'm very excited about, is third-party financing. And we're very excited to be joined by Jenny Heater from the National Renewable Energy Lab and Diana Mineta with Missoula County, who are going to walk us through not only what third-party financing is and how it works, but also the first on-the-ground third-party finance project in Montana. So without further ado, I will ask Jenny to begin sharing her slides. I will stop sharing mine. And while she does, I will go ahead and read her bio here. Jenny is a senior energy analyst at the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado. She has spent more than 12 years at NREL researching equitable solar deployment and community solar development at cost, and currently serving on a detailed assignment with the Department of Energy's Office of Economic Impact and Diversity to support implementation of President Biden's Justice 40 executive order. She has 5 years of experience managing solar technical assistance programs for local governments, higher ed institutions, and community solar stakeholders. And before coming to NREL, she was an analyst with the Indiana Office of Utility Consumer Council, focusing on energy efficiency and green power programs. She has an MPA in environmental policy from Indiana University Bloomington School of Public and Environmental Affairs, and a BA in environmental studies and political science from Macalester College. So Jenny, thank you again so much for joining us today, and go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks for having me, and yeah, pleasure to be joining this group today. I'm going to run through some slides that we pulled together a number of years ago for cities and counties considering PV deployment. We talk about third-party financing, but also some of the other options, just so we can kind of compare and contrast what those different options are. So really from this presentation, we're hoping people will understand which type of financing option makes sense for a city or county, or if you're not a city or county, you could translate this to just any sort of mid-size customer. And then we also talk a little bit about the PV procurement process. So what are the steps involved with different types of procurement? We're going to talk about direct ownership, power purchase agreements, energy savings performance contracting, couple other options that are not as widely used, and then some procurement lessons. So just to set the stage, historically, local governments have tended to use the third-party solar ownership model because really public sector entities are tax exempt, and because there is a federal investment tax credit that you need tax liability to take advantage of. It's been a more cost-effective way to install a project if you rely on third parties to monetize that tax incentive. Tax incentives are changing all the time. So looking towards the future, once this tax incentive or if this tax incentive rolls off, we could see some changes there, but trends have been pretty steady even after this data, even though it's a little bit old. So when we talk about direct ownership, I'm going to review this first so just we understand what the contrast between direct ownership and third-party ownership. This is really where the government is owning the project. So the city or county or whoever is implementing the project will hire an engineering, procurement, and construction contractor. That contractor will construct the project. They may also be in charge of the O&M, the operations and maintenance associated with the project. So when we talk about how do you get the money to own a system, a lot of cities that we've worked with, they don't have cash just sitting on hand to fund a system. So they've looked to internal or external funding sources to do that. Internal sources of funding could be some sources of revenue generated by tax collection or user fees or other available cash in the budget. External sources might be bonds or loans. I know we're going to hear from Diana as well as with a great local example. I have a few examples just across the country. This community college district in California, they used a general obligation bond for their installation at a college there. Their bond monies could be used for capital improvement projects. So they dedicated money from that to go towards the solar project. And then the savings that they receive from the solar go back into the general fund. They installed about 230 kilowatts. You can see a picture of there on a baseball field house and a parking lot. So they ended up doing like a canopy parking installation. Another example here is in Minnesota. The city of Hutchinson, Minnesota, they paired some funding sources. So they had some grant funding from their local utility to cover about 3/4 of the cost, and then the city covered the rest. This was about 400 kilowatts installed on a closed landfill that's actually directly connected to the wastewater treatment plant in that city. I think I'll just breeze through this, but I think it'll be recorded for posterity. In general, the steps, if you're going to own a system, is to issue an RFP for that contractor, deciding whether you want to hire an O&M contractor, evaluating the responses to that RFP, signing your contracts, then starting construction. If you did not hire an O&M contractor, then you'd want to do the O&M on your own. I'm going to breeze through municipal lease because it is quite complicated, but just to give folks a sense, municipal leases are an option for municipalities. These are sometimes called tax exempt leases. You are then purchasing the system or you're owning the system at the end of the lease term. So it's an alternative to traditional debt financing. It can see lower interest rates because the interest is tax exempt. So this is actually a more complicated option, but can work for municipalities in particular. But the heart of third-party options we see are really being power purchase agreements. This is where the third-party solar developer is purchasing, installing, owning, operating, and maintaining the PV project. That developer is likely taking advantage of federal and other tax incentives. If the developer is not doing that themselves, they're working with somebody else who can do that for them. And the developer may also be in charge of selling the project's solar renewable energy certificates or SRECs if they're valuable. I don't know whether there's a market for SRECs in Montana, but in some other states we do see a monetary value for SRECs, and some customers decide that they would rather sell the SRECs to the utility or some other party in order to lower the cost of their system. And then the city in this structure or off-taker is hosting the project, and they are purchasing the energy from the project over the life of the contract. What we've seen in the past is that the best option for larger PV systems can be a PPA. Usually these systems are more than 500 kilowatts, and these are typically longer term contracts, like 20 years. For projects that are a little bit smaller, like 100 or 200 kilowatts, it's just less preferable from a third-party solar developer perspective, because they have to do a lot more work monetizing the tax credits and doing these sort of one-off custom installations that may not be as valuable to them, but certainly it can be done as well for smaller projects. Couple examples here in Washington, D.C., they implemented approximately 11 megawatts spread across 40 properties, and they signed 20-year PPAs with a company called WGL Energy. They put solar on schools, hospitals, rec centers, and their police training academy. And DC does have a fairly high-priced SREC market, so they ended up selling the SRECs in order to lower the cost of their installation. And they expected to save about $25 million in electricity costs. Interestingly, this project, or this set of projects, was a mix of rooftop and carport solar projects. And we do see local governments in particular doing more carports, I would say, than other types of off-takers, because they have the space and maybe the interest in providing shading or providing some other co-benefit from that type of installation. So in terms of doing a PPA, a little bit cleaner in terms of the process and steps. From a local government perspective or just off-taker perspective, the first piece is issuing that RFP, then doing the evaluation, signing the contract, and then commence construction. So I want to review just one more type of structure, which is the Energy Savings Performance Contract. This is known as ESPC. Usually done through an ESCO, so lots of acronyms here, but an Energy Solutions Performance Contract Company, as often called an ESCO. ESCOs are used to doing energy efficiency projects, but many of them have started merging into PV and often merging efficiency contract with a PV measure as well. The ESCO structure usually has some type of guaranteed savings requirement along with annual measurement and verification of those savings. So what we have seen typically with ESCO structures that have PV is that this is just illustrative figure here. On the left, you see with no ESPC, the customer is just paying their bill. During the ESPC, the customer will pay the ESPC. They'll also see some savings. And then after the ESPC, they'll still see the savings in orange there, but no longer be paying that contract. These are also typically for larger projects or larger portfolios, around at least $1 million of work for that third party to feel like it's valuable to them. ESPC is more highly regulated than some other options, so we advise folks to consult their state statutes, consult a lawyer to figure out, really what are the guidelines, what types of projects can be included. We also know that some of our ESPCs can provide some of this education and information for folks as well. But just a little bit more here on ESPCs. They do require some financing source. It can be internal or external. Really depends on what the off-taker or the organization is looking for. And I know I'm a little bit over time, so just to wrap it up, the ESPC model is more complicated. There are more steps here. Involves really determining what type of ESPC and what technologies you'll include, then doing the procurement process and implementation. So I think I'll leave it there, but I know these slides are going to be up, so folks can review them. And we also have our resources, I'm just skipping to the end here, as well. So we do have an RFP process information available. We also have some lessons on like how to write an RFP, or if folks are at that stage. And happy to answer more questions as we move forward through the presentation.
That was great, Jenny. Thank you so much for that overview. And yeah, I'm looking forward to passing the controls over to Diana to talk about the first project we had here in Montana using this format. So Diana Moneta is the Sustainability Program Manager for Missoula County, where she is responsible for the county's efforts to address climate change, including the 100% Clean Electricity Initiative. Diana has worked in the field of energy and climate for 15 years, including previous positions as Executive Director of the Montana Renewable Energy Association, for anyone familiar with that group, and as an advisor to the California Energy Commission. She also has a master's degree in energy and resources from UC Berkeley. Diana, thank you so much for joining us today, and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm assuming you're all seeing my screen now. Please tell me if not. But happy to be here and excited to talk about the Missoula County Detention Facility solar project, which is a recently completed third-party financed solar array. So just to start with a little bit of context on the building itself that we're seeing here in the photo. It is about 129,000 square feet. It's the largest county-owned building by far in terms of energy consumption. The county has more than 50 facilities, but this one facility accounts for more than 1/3 of our total electricity consumption in government operations. And the building was re-roofed in 2020. So the county felt like the time was good to get solar on that big, flat, beautiful roof, given that the roof will last now for quite a long time. Missoula County is interested in pursuing opportunities for rooftop solar because of a couple of goals the county has adopted. One is a goal of carbon neutrality in county government operations, and another is a goal that we're working on in partnership with the city of Missoula for 100% clean electricity for the Missoula urban area as a whole. So putting solar on county-owned buildings is a way to advance both of these goals while also reducing our electric bills over the long term and saving taxpayer money. So win-win as far as we're concerned. So we started out by doing working with a firm to do a solar design and feasibility assessment for this building. One thing I want to mention is, as many or all of you are aware, under Montana law and regulation, there's a size limit for net metered systems in the state of Montana of 50 kilowatts. However, as you may also be aware, it is possible to install rooftop solar arrays that are larger than 50 kilowatts if they're not net metered, but rather are what we call a non-export array in compliance with Northwestern Energy's non-export interconnection standards. And so what that means is that all of the energy produced by the solar array is used immediately on site in the facility. The facility needs to have sufficient demand for electricity, use sufficient electricity to be able to absorb all of that instantaneously, so that you're never exporting any of that solar energy onto the grid. And so that's the case for this building. We ended up, I'll show you a picture in a minute, but we ended up with 432 kilowatts DC of solar, so quite a bit larger than that 50 kilowatt limit we would have been held to if it were a net metered array. However, it's never going to be possible with a non-export array to produce all of the power you need to run a facility, and that's because you basically have to size it to never exceed, to never in any minute exceed how much you're using in that building. And so in this case, we're able to produce about 20% of the electricity used in the detention facility. If the array were much larger than it is, it would much more often need to be curtailed to avoid exceeding the consumption in the facility. We were also limited by going bigger from the size of the roof and some constraints of the roof as well. In terms of financing, the county was aware of the third-party financing model that, as Jenny mentioned, is used frequently in other states. Is actually the predominant way that local governments finance solar in other states, but was not something that had been done in Montana as far as we knew. But we liked the idea of saving money, of being able to take advantage indirectly of that 26% federal investment tax credit that the county, as a public entity, wouldn't otherwise be able to take advantage of, but through this public-private partnership essentially gives us a way to do that. And then we also liked the idea of essentially piloting this financing model in the state of Montana and hopefully making it easier for others to follow in the future and making it more affordable for public and nonprofit entities in particular who don't have tax liability to install solar. So in terms of our process, we put out, after we had the system designed, so we knew the size of it and the specifications, we put out a competitive solicitation, an RFP, not just for the solar array itself, but for the array plus the financing of it, essentially. So we specified we wanted this to be a third-party financed project, and we were looking for respondents who could provide that through a solar lease or PPA, or we were pretty flexible because we wanted to leave it open. Again, this is something fairly new in Montana, and we wanted to see what sort of responses we might get. So we ended up selecting through that process a firm called Sarok Energy, which is a local investor based here in Missoula, and who partnered with a Montana-based solar installer called On-Site Energy for the actual installation of the project. I'm trying to shift my slide here. Oh, I did it. I may have shifted it twice. So this is the array in progress, installation in progress. These are our 3 county commissioners on the left, and then our county facilities director on the right, checking in on the roof of the detention facility during installation. You can see the racking there. The project itself, I will show the full array. You can only really see it from a drone because it's on these 2 different levels of the roof. It was completed just this past November. It is, as I mentioned, total capacity is 432 kilowatts DC. That is made up of 1,152 solar panels. We believe it's the largest rooftop solar array in the state of Montana at this point, but we would love to see others surpass that with systems in the future. In terms of financing, since that's our topic here, the array itself is owned by Sarok Energy. There was no cost to the county upfront for the installation. The county now pays Sarok on a monthly basis for the energy produced by the array at roughly the rate that we would otherwise be paying Northwestern for that portion of the energy that we use. So it's essentially a wash to the county for the first 5 years. And then after 5 years, the county plans to purchase the array from Sarok at a depreciated rate. And at that point, the county will own it and will continue to benefit from the energy that it produces for at least its 25-year lifetime. In terms of savings to the county overall, we are expecting our net savings after taking costs into account to be more than $400,000 over the lifetime of the array. Again, those are savings to the county and ultimately to county taxpayers. So I think, oh, I got one more slide here. Nice view of the array with Mount Sentinel there in the background, and just a few of those quick stats that I mentioned already about the project. So I think I'll stop there just to leave plenty of time for questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Diana, for sharing the project with us. And it's definitely exciting. I'm happy to see you encourage other communities to install larger rooftop solar systems, but I'm sure Missoula County is excited that you have the biggest for now. It's always nice to have the crown, for, at least for a little while. Yeah, so with that, thank you again both to Jenny and to Diana. We'll go ahead and open it up to questions, and I'll remind everyone that you can submit your questions just using the chat function. Oh, of course, we've already got one. So go ahead and submit them to the chat, and I will go ahead and facilitate and try and kind of pass them off to our speakers here. So this is for Diana, a question from Ben Brower. What kind of facility electrical load did you use to size the system, and how was that data collected?
So, Ben, please clarify if I misunderstand your question here, but the system was sized. So basically we needed, in order to figure out how big we could build a non-export array, we needed to know the energy consumption on a 15-minute interval basis for the facility. And luckily that information was available from Northwestern Energy. We put in a data request and they were able to provide it because the building was metered on a 15-minute basis. And as part of the solar design and feasibility assessment, that assessment was done to basically project production of the array on a 15-minute basis throughout the year, compare that to the 15-minute consumption data for the facility, and ensure that we wouldn't be exceeding that. It's okay to exceed it in a small number of hours. The non-export controls automatically curtail the production of the array, but if you're exceeding it in a lot of hours, again, then it's not going to be cost effective because you're not able to take advantage of that production. But Ben, please jump in here if I didn't actually answer the question.
No, that's perfect. Thanks, Diana.
Great, thanks, Diana. Thanks, Ben. Let's see, for Jenny. Oh, I see Jenny got a couple direct questions. Yeah, Jenny, let's start with those. So let's see, from Gary, are utility scale projects feasible for municipalities?
Yeah, so really when you're talking about the size of the project, it comes down to what the enabling policy framework is and what load the municipality has. So like Diana was saying, the system needed to be sized so that it would not export and that it is, attached to customers' load. I don't know all the ins and outs of Montana rules and regulations, so Diana or Andrew speak as you see fit. But my sense is that for municipalities, they tend to be smaller projects that are rooftop or connected to load. They are not what we call utility scale projects that are connected to transmission and might be just serving the grid.
Yeah, I think you're right on there, Jenny. And I think for especially a third-party finance project, I think that's typically has to do with a smaller scale versus utility scale. I think utility scale at that point, developers have different financing models that they use and approaches for projects like that. But thank you for the question, Gary. That's a good one. Another one for Jenny from David. Do SRECs automatically retire or sunset at the end of equipment life cycle? For example, about a 25-year life for PV. And I'm glad we're talking about SRECs. To your question earlier, I don't believe Montana has a big market for renewable energy credits right now. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know with the loss of our renewable energy portfolio standard, that's kind of shifted the landscape as well. So, but anyway, to the question, Jenny, would love to hear your comment on kind of how those work.
Yeah, so usually the ownership of SRECs in a third-party agreement will be spelled out in the contract. Mostly we see contracts 20 to 30 years for a PPA, and the PPA should be very explicit that which party owns those SRECs over the term. It could be that the host is taking the SRECs for the whole period, could be that the developer is taking the SRECs for the whole period, or some mix of that. But basically, an SREC is generated anytime there is solar production. So that production can happen after the length of, a standard equipment life cycle. Even after 25 years, PV systems are still producing. So after that period, it would be, up to the parties to figure out what happens to those SRECs.
Great, thanks for that, Jenny. And I have a follow-up question for Diana, but really quickly, just to let everyone know, it is 12:30, but we do have some more questions, and I think Diana and Jenny said they would both stay on for a couple more minutes. So with just a few left, we'll see if we can get through them. But Diana, following up on the question about SREC, so I'm sorry if I missed this during the presentation, but what is the situation with the county projects? Do you own the SRECs? Does the financier own it? Was that discussed in the contract?
We didn't talk a lot about it because to my knowledge, there isn't much of a market for SRECs in Montana, as you mentioned, Andrew. To the extent that we did, the county was not interested in selling those off because we wanted to retain ownership of them, again, kind of to take credit for the renewable attribute essentially of the system, both for our carbon neutrality goal and our clean electricity goal. So that was our desire, but again, I'm not sure that selling them off even would have been an option in Montana.
Sure. Okay, the next question comes from Evora for Diana. Since this is a new approach for Montana, that being third-party financing, how did the county choose a partner for third-party financing? What was that process like, especially since they're, like Evora said, it's a pretty new model here.
Yeah, and that was why, well, both because it was a new model and also because this is just the county's procurement process. We did a competitive solicitation for that. Like I mentioned, we put out an RFP, which we would have done even if it were just a straightforward solar array that the county would own. But again, the RFP specified that we were looking for third-party financing as part of the proposals that we got in response to that, both the financing and the actual installation of the array. And we just tried to circulate that RFP as widely as we could through sort of national networks and local, within the state as well. We didn't get a ton of responses to it. I think, again, because it is because it's a new model for Montana, I think, folks had to figure some things out, and we didn't get a large number. We got a small handful of responses and ended up selecting CEROC that we went with based on basically it was the best financial deal to the county of the various responses that we did get. So yeah, it was an interesting process. And again, my hope is that as there's more awareness of this, as folks are seeing, this project was successful. I know that the city of Missoula recently put out an RFP for a similar type of project, similar size, also asking for third-party financing for a project at the city's wastewater treatment facility. And so as more and more of these projects move forward, I'm hoping that there will be, maybe even more competition, more responses, more folks wanting to get involved.
Yeah, thanks for that, Diana. And that kind of leads to a question that I have for Jenny. Jenny, one thing you mentioned in your presentation, obviously, is that your presentation kind of came from a training that you were using for kind of municipality and kind of a government approach to third-party financing. But I know we've seen third-party financing for residential systems as well. Do you have a sense of kind of the percentage split as far as how common third-party financing is for residential customers versus government? I guess I'm trying to get a sense of we know this is popular in other states, but exactly how popular is it? And are most states using this? Is it just a handful of the bigger markets like California and New Jersey and Florida? Or I'm wondering if you have a little bit of that context as well.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but Lawrence Berkeley National Lab puts out some reports called Tracking the Sun that do have some of those stats around third-party financing versus customer ownership in the residential space. Residential customers may be a little bit more likely to own their system, in particular as costs have come down, and they might be able to just have more cash on hand to purchase a system compared to, in previous years. I would say, yeah, third-party ownership is restricted in some states across the country, but in most of our bigger markets, it is enabled. And it really does help scale markets because, because you don't need to put any money down. You don't need to have cash just pulling from some other source that you would have been using for something else on a household level. So I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it is quite common for residential customers to still do third-party financing, especially as some of our more middle income and lower income customers are merging into solar. The third-party financing option is more preferable for those income segments.
Sure. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Especially, I know one thing you both addressed was the fact that nonprofit entities can't take certain tax credits And so using a third-party financing model kind of allows access to some of those credits, which helps with the cost as well. Let's see, we have another question here from Caitlin for Diana, which, Diana, I think you may have addressed this maybe a little bit in your last comments, but do you see other opportunities for using third-party financing for rooftop solar, maybe paired with batteries in Missoula and of course, maybe in other communities around the state too? And from your perspective and experience, kind of what size array do you feel like is large enough kind of to be worth considering exploring this option?
Yeah, great questions. Well, I did mention, in terms of immediate opportunities, the city of Missoula has already put out an RFP. I believe, I'm not actually sure if that's closed yet or not. It was fairly recent. But if someone from the city is on the line, they can speak up if they like. But in terms of other opportunities, and the size question, I think that's a really important question, and it's one that ultimately it's up to the financier, right, up to whoever's financing the project in terms of does it pencil out. And as Jenny mentioned, this is something that we've heard anecdotally also is for a 50 or 100 kilowatt system, it's tough to make it pencil out. So again, it worked for us with this 432 kilowatt DC array. And my sense is that, maybe 250 kilowatts and up. I'm kind of throwing a number out there though. So I think, it's worth talking more with the firms that are financing these projects and exploring kind of where are the limits of that. And I imagine it would depend not just on the number of kilowatts, but on other aspects of the array in terms of the cost, depending on, is it a rooftop array? Is it a ground mounted array? And are there other complicating factors that might weigh into that as well? So I'm not sure. I threw out a number, which I probably shouldn't have done because I'm not sure that there's a really clear line there. But I certainly hope that there are, I believe there are plenty of other opportunities out there. It is most of our local governments, right? We're fairly small in Montana in terms of the number and size of our facilities compared to, big cities. Like some of the examples that Jenny showed, we couldn't, and also under Montana law and regulation, we can't install, 20 megawatts, unfortunately, of solar for our operations. But we could do this for the detention facility. And I know there are a number of other similar sized facilities around the state where it could be, I think, a really good option.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Dan. I know just generally it's really exciting to see this model being tested and successfully in Montana. So hopefully it takes off. We've got one final question, and this one is going to Diana. Ben asks about the depreciated cost of the system when the county plans on purchasing it, if you're willing to share that. And this is a question that I think comes up often with these models. What kind of funding or financing will you use to purchase the system at that time? Right. I think the kind of handoff is something we see a lot in these types of third-party ownership models. So yeah, would you mind sharing more about those?
Sure. Yeah. The depreciated cost of the system that we're anticipating in our, and this is in our contract with SEROC, is $430,000. Again, 5 years from now. And in terms of how the county will finance that, I think the county is considering various options depending on what's most advantageous at the time. The county and local governments in Montana, I believe, frequently use the intercap loan program, which is a good interest rate, and so it's likely to be financed through a loan program like that. Although it could also be that the county chooses at that time to just fund it directly if funds are available. So. Again, I think there are options there. I'm not sure that the final determination has been made, but hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks, Diana. And I said that was going to be the last one, but there was one more that just got submitted under the wire for Jenny that I'd love to address just because I think it's a good one. Jenny, Vicky asks, for a 20-year PPA, the city will host the project and buy the energy for 20 years, but essentially what happens after that? What are kind of the next steps after that PPA kind of concludes?
Yeah, so there can be various options. One is that the off-taker or the city could buy the system. So they could buy it at a predetermined price or a price that is determined at like kind of fair market value at the end of that 20 years. The city could also have the system removed, presumably at a little bit of a cost if they really want to be done with it, or might be using that space or have other needs or things like that. We tend not to see that very much. But then there could also just be a continuation of the contract as is. If the parties want to extend their power purchase agreement, they could keep going just under a new contract. The system will be likely producing less at that time, but still producing something. So yeah, the energy can still be used by parties even after 20 years.
Right, and that's the great thing about solar panels that I know I answer this question a lot in presentations that I do around the state is, there is a drop off in the production, a small drop off over the years, but the panels will keep producing for a long time. I know there's one that I drive by on the way to Helena that's powering a traffic light at a train crossing that has a bullet hole in it, and I talked to the installer and it's still producing. So there you go. But with that, I just want to give a huge thank you again to Diana and Jenny for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. And I want to thank all of you for attending the webinar today. The Exploring Energy series will continue next month and every month this year on the first Wednesday at noon. Next month, we'll be diving into nuclear energy, which is a bit of a hot topic right now in Montana. One of our legislative interim committees is doing some research on small modular reactors. And there's a lot of discussion right now on, is nuclear energy an energy source that we need in the future, that we want to use? And so we're going to try and dive into some of those topics because we think it's going to be really interesting for our audience. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you next month.